Welcome to another very special episode of Art Matters with Wayne Quackenbush. We're back at Annex Comics at 308 Broadway in Newport, and we're still celebrating art, and this time we're going to concentrate for the first time on the spoken word. We have Leah Erickson here, and she'll be participating in another Weird Tales at the Annex event for Halloween, and she's going to be talking to us today about her novels and then she'll be reading for us. Leah's second novel, Blythe of the Gates, has just been published, and it's a historical novel set at the turn of the century in old New York. You want to tell us a little bit about the book?
Certainly. Yes, this book opens in the year 1911 in New York City, and it follows the story of Luna Mulkerin, who is a young Irish immigrant who just lands in New York for the first time and ends up in an unhappy marriage. She's married to a magician, and she's kind of an indentured servant. She's the stage assistant, and the book follows the arc of how she kind of breaks free of that and discovers who she is, and she ends up becoming a magician herself. And along the way there are like love affairs and murder and the mafia and all kinds of great, exciting things.
So this is your second published book. I know you have had quite a few short stories published. Did you do any special research to kind of make the historical setting real?
I did. It's so different. I'm used to writing contemporary era fiction, and this is my first historical piece. And I did a lot of research into that time period. There's a wellspring of material. There's, the clothes, the food, the dances, the living conditions. And this period in history is so rich because it's kind of the bridge between the Victorian era and the modern era. Because you had, like Art Nouveau turning into Art Deco. We had vaudeville becoming movies. People driving cars for the first time. It's incredibly rich, and I was very excited to delve into that.
In New York at that time was really intense because of people coming in and the changes in technology and transportation. And reading the book, you really get down into the nitty-gritty, like the clothing and the food and everything. So I know that you're a full-time writer. I mean, I know you have a family as well. And so I was wondering, since we usually talk with visual artists on the show, and they're usually happy to bring us into their studio and talk about their techniques, I was wondering if you had a special place where you write, or if you had a special process that you could talk to us about.
Right. Yeah, in my creative work, I kind of move between two states of being. When I try to keep kind of unfocused and opened up for the ideas to come in, kind of make yourself into a conduit or a lightning rod for ideas. That could be through meditation, or it could be through just mundane activities. And that's kind of when I do my real important work. And that's interspersed with the other half, which is sitting at a desk and simply, working your way through it brick by brick, like you're laying a wall. That's not as exciting, and I can't do that just anywhere. I need to be at my desk at a certain time. I need quiet. Yeah, but if you show up every day at the right time and the muse kind of comes to you, you have to keep that appointment.
Do you work a set number of hours a day? Do you sit down at a certain time and stop at a certain time?
Yes, and it's it's not very long either. It's compressed because I'm doing so much work in my subconscious when I'm in my
of course, yeah.
spaced out state, which is
Yeah,
most of the
let
time.
The chemistry flow, and because I have friends who will go to Starbucks and they like the hubbub and what are you doing? What are you writing?
There's an app. Supposedly, the background noise of a coffee shop is supposed to be conducive to creativity.
Well, it's kind of like being on a stage, I would think.
Yeah, a lot of people.
Because you have an audience.
Yeah, they like the buzz of the noise without having to interact with it.
So I'm familiar with your work to a certain extent. I've read the first book, The Brambles, and I'm just at the beginning of the second one, which is already fascinating. How would you characterize your work? Do you fit in a genre, or are you kind of, the way I see it, you're kind of a mix of things, and we'll get into that in a minute.
Yeah, I'm a mix of something. I would describe my work as I would call it dense. I don't know if that's a good way to sell books or not, but
a little poetic maybe.
Well, my work I work slowly. My work has kind of a heaviness, a heft to it.
Mm-hmm.
Dense, like a fruit cake.
Well,
It's
you can show the book here, and we'll focus on it in a little bit.
It's a heavy, but I guess that's my case. The book is heavy. It's like 5 pounds. But,
I remember when you first got the shipment of that, and you were like, "Oh, this feels so good. It's so."
But you're right. I am a mix. I guess I'm literary because most of my work is kind of interior. It goes into the characters' minds.
Mm-hmm.
But some people think it's kind of dark.
Dark
I don't
is
necessarily
good.
think so.
Maybe a little edgy, a little. I mean, I think you definitely follow in the weird tradition, even though you don't. We haven't really talked about your affinity to that so much. Do you have any favorite writers?
I do. I like writers kind of like me that have really no genre. I love Joyce Carol Oates,
Mm-hmm.
who is, some people consider her a horror writer.
She has ever been.
She's great because she puts out a new book like every 6 months. She's going to be the most prolific writer
And
out
she's very active on Twitter, too.
She is. She's a spitfire. She's like 85 years old or something,
Yeah,
which
no
is hard to
kidding.
believe. And her work is as vital as ever. It's edgy. Talk about edgy. I've noticed a lot of older female writers are the most edgy. I'm thinking Flannery O'Connor.
Oh, yeah.
Eudora Welty. A lot of women who on the outside look very staid and conservative or even grandmotherly. They can really turn out the dark, weird stuff.
Well, Shirley Jackson's a good example of that, too.
Right. Good example. But yeah, I also like some of the classics, like John Updike, who does he does really great characters and dialogue. Trying to think who else. Vladimir Nabokov is a big influence of mine.
I remember you listing one of his books as being one of your favorites. Yes.
Right. And
Pale Fire?
That's a really good one.
Mm-hmm.
Meta fiction. Lolita. He wrote some great short stories. But he's a really interesting writer because he had synesthesia.
Yes.
Where you kind of, I don't know how to define it. It's where your
take
senses.
one sensory input and it's perceived as another, so you can feel colors and see sounds. that sort of thing. I didn't realize he had that. That's pretty amazing.
Yeah, so he actually saw language. He'd see a word, and he would see it in color and shape and all of those things. So it gave his work kind of a whole other dimension to it. And
that makes a lot of sense. Yeah, very good. I wanted to talk about the Brambles because I'm much more familiar with that, and it's kind of starts out almost like a young adult Hardy Boys, Nancy Drew type mystery, and then there's ghosts, or I won't reveal too much, but it ends up with a very interesting mix of different economic levels of people in suburban Connecticut town, and there's a religious cult, and then for good measure there's a biker gang thrown in. So that's a lot going on. You want to tell us a little bit about the inspiration for that?
Yeah, that one, that's my big hefty book. It's like 400 pages. That had a confluence of different inspirations. It was inspired by a lucid dream I had once where I was talking to my 13-year-old self. That was kind of a freaky, mystical thing.
Wow.
Experiencing myself as an adolescent and all of that rawness and openness. So that is, that was like an apparition, kind of like the girl in the book. And the other influence was my daughter was reading at the time a lot of V.C. Andrews.
Oh, right.
I don't know if you're familiar with that.
Yeah.
Like Flowers in the Attic and all that kind of stuff. I've never read her books myself, but I would get my daughter to describe the plots to me.
I'm sure she acted it out in a good way.
But the plots are...
ruined a lot of young minds, those books.
And young people love those books. They always have.
Talk about transgressive.
Really. But there's like incest and religious fervor and spirit possession and tigers mauling people and all kinds of things. So I was like, wow, there are young adult books about these topics.
They turned it into a franchise too. Long after the author was dead, I think her relatives kept writing them too.
I didn't know she was dead.
Yeah.
But I saw these. I didn't read the books, but I was inspired by the plots because I thought those are a work of art, and I kind of took it as inspiration. I thought I want to write a plot like that. So my plot has a defrocked priest, motorcycle gang.
There's lots of taboos, and Blythe of the Gates starts out with taboos. The woman is married, and she's meeting her young lover in the Brooklyn Navy Yard or near there, and there's all sorts of mayhem and hijinks ahead for that. I really want to thank you for coming down today. I know that we're going to be treated to you reading one of your passages, and thank you again.
Thank you. Okay, I'm going to be reading a chapter from my new novel, Blythe of the Gates. As I said, one of the main characters is a magician, and this chapter is kind of a little of his backstory. He ran away from home. He was an orphan taken in by a farmer, and he ran away from home to join the circus. So this is a bit of his origin story. Okay. He had had an identity before he became the magician, but one made of ash, blown away on the winds of time. His name had been Jack Friday because someone left him at the door of the Foundling Hospital on a Friday. Ridiculous name. It shamed him even to say it. He had become the magician at the age of 20, and until then his youth had been as harsh and as slow-moving as a glacier. Now 21, things were finally changing for the better. The whole world would cede and open to him, where once it had been closed tight as a fist. He knew it in his soul, in the marrow of his bones. Yet he still remembered the cow's cracked teeth that bled in his hand on a winter morning so cold the snot froze below his nostrils. Hellscape of cold, a dizzying blue sky, and the cock regarded him with one crazed and preening eye, and the farmer slapped him hard on the ear with his big red hand because there was blood in the milk. The first time he had ever been in a theater was at the age of 9, when they sent him off to the orphan train. He and the other children took their turn on the stage in each town, walking and turning side to side, in the hope that someone would pick them for adoption. Though he didn't know then that he would one day be the magician, he felt an affinity with that amplified space, the hushed expectancy of the rows of seats, the majesty of the velvet stage curtains. Some of the other children grinned or sang or danced, but he, a boy of 9, steely and tall for his age, stood impassively, arms crossed, looking straight back at all of them. Even then, there were intimations of the power that would one day be his. The farmer and his wife chose him at one of these theaters and took him to their farm in Michigan, where he often slept in a hayloft and worked sun up to sun down. He was a city boy, and the wide open spaces and its animal life frightened and repelled him. For 7 years he withstood it, but knew that someday, when he was ready, he would return to New York. He'd been happier when he lived at the Foundling, sleeping in a row of brass beds with the other kids. He had his little gang of boys, all younger, who looked up to him and did whatever he said. And how he had loved the sisters who cared for them and drifted through the halls in their long white gowns and wimples, skirts swaying, so like earthbound angels with large folded wings. Why did they send him away? Put him on a train with a name tag and a sandwich in a brown bag? He would never forgive them. The notion of escape fortified him through those harsh Michigan years. Escape and revenge. One spring day, the year that Jack Friday turned 16, he walked down the dirt lane into town, a rucksack across his shoulders. The farmer's wife had sent him to buy coffee, cornmeal, and a bottle of nerve tonic. A breezy day, the wind stirred the tall grasses. A few fleecy clouds raced through the sky. His mind on nothing, really, besides the pleasure of getting away from the farm. Taller than most men at 6'5", and though wiry, he was strong from years of farm labor. The farmer hesitated to lash him now. He could draw himself up to his full height and fix the old man with an unblinking stare until he backed down and lowered his eyes, muttering, "Never mind, worthless." But that day he walked the lane with his empty rucksack in a light-hearted mood. He picked up a stick and trailed it along a cow fence, to the rhythm of a train striking down its tracks. Out, out, out of here, soon. He heard a horse and buggy race up behind him, but he did not turn. Let them pass. But the driver pulled up on the reins as he approached. "Here now, boy, take this, would you?" It was a one-horse buggy, old and creaking. The man who drove it was red-headed, with a swollen red whiskey nose. He had the look of an old pervert about him, and the boy smelled the drink on him from that far away. He held out a piece of paper in his fat fingers. With a look of distaste, the boy took it from him. It was a flyer for a circus. "Forenzi Brothers, Great American Consolidated Show, Aerial Acrobatics, Reckless Red Men on Horseback, Marvelous Curiosities." The boy broke off reading and looked at the illustrations. Ink drawings of clowns, fancy ladies in costume, monkeys in frilled collars. "Come to the show, the field behind Town Hall. 5 cents. Tell your friends. Post that thing up, you hear?" The buggy was already past him, kicking up a cloud of dust when the boy looked up again. "Hey," he called, but the driver did not turn back. Left behind in the sudden silence, he peered again at the faces of the clowns, grinning rapturously. A Chinaman with inscrutable eyes and a long trailing mustache, hands tucked into his sleeves, and gazed back at him. A snarling tiger. It looked like a block print. The bright colors overlapped the black outlines, the vibrancy too much to contain. To lower the flyer and look back at the dirt road and the tall grass and the cow fence was to see it all anew. He saw it as a man might look at a quaint scene from his past, soon to be vanquished to memory. Something deep inside lit him up, and he walked faster, and then ran just for running's sake. He crammed the flyer into the rucksack, and he raced, free as the wind and the clouds above. Every once in a while he tipped his head up to the sun, a blazing ball of fire too bright to look into, but he dared to anyway. His legs brought him to the field behind Town Hall, where from far away he saw rows of garish painted wagons aligned to the side, and 4 enormous poles already erected stood tall enough to puncture the breezy blue sky itself. Without even thinking, he ran boldly up to the men preparing to pull back on the ropes to raise the canvas tent, each rope attached to a circus horse that stood at the ready. "Let me help," he said, not smiling, but drawing himself up to his full height and looking at the 4 men down his nose. Handed the reins of a gray-spotted mare, he waited for the signal to pull forward. The tent's billowing red and white fabric caught the wind of the spring day like the sails of a great ship grandly exiting the harbor.
Welcome back to the first ever spoken word version of Art Matters with Wayne Quackenbush. Today we're commemorating Weird Tales at the Annex and the art opening of Holly Ferreira. And our guest here is Jeff Medeiros, and he's written a collection of short stories called Midnight Creeps. And the title of the book pulls no punches, and neither do the short stories within. Jeff, you want to give us an idea where Midnight Creeps came from?
Well, the title came from a Frank Zappa song, Zombie Wolf, actually.
Okay. And do you remember the quote that you used?
Oh, yes. 300 years ago, I thought I might get some sleep. I stretched myself out on my antique bed, and my spirit did a midnight creep. You know I'll never sleep no more. It seems to me that it just ain't wise. Did you ever wake up in the morning with a zombie wolf behind your eyes, just about as evil as you could be? And that's where the title came from.
Now, I've known you for a number of years, first of all, as a kind of a quiet but avid customer of the old Annex when we were down at 312, we're at 308 Broadway now, in Newport. And you were in looking around at the books and the DVDs and the movies and the memorabilia and everything, looking mostly for H.P. Lovecraft stuff. And I know you count him as a major influence. Would you
Absolutely.
like to talk about that and any other influences you might have?
Yeah, of course, Lovecraft was a major influence, and so was Edgar Allan Poe. Those are my 2 main influences.
And
You know, they're both absolute geniuses, and they completely, not only did they inspire me, but they also intimidated me, but I still tried my best to work in that same genre and kind of do what they do in my own way.
but it definitely helped you define your voice. And that's one thing I've noticed about your work, is that your language is consistent in that it's a kind of archaic, and you seem to be evoking, say, the best pulp fiction masters of the 1920s and 1930s. And do you want to talk a little about a bit where that comes from?
Yeah, I always like the idea of weird tales, and I think that's why I do what I do. I mean, I like to write in the distant past, from another time.
I mean, it seems to me your one of your main objectives is to create anxiety in the reader,
Yes.
and you do a really good job of it. Do you think that the archaic voice helps you achieve that? That alien sense that you bring out?
Absolutely, yeah.
Now, I know that you're definitely a New England writer. You live up in Tiverton now. I'm not sure if you're from Tiverton, but you
Newport.
certainly have a unique view of New England, because if you read your stories, you'll find that nothing is safe. The house isn't safe. The beach isn't safe, especially. Roads, cemeteries especially are really dangerous. Even furniture's dangerous.
Yes.
Now, though, have you really felt that kind of sense of fear and paranoia living your life in Newport and Tiverton?
Yes and no. I would say not really. However, I have lived in a lot of haunted houses on the island, and I've had a lot of supernatural experiences over time. And in fact, I keep saying that these are all works of fiction, which is mostly true, but there are some of these stories, 3 in fact, that are inspired by supernatural events that I lived through.
Mm-hmm.
You talk about the furniture, for example. The one story in this volume is called In the Chair of Nightmare, and that is about a chair that has an entity of some kind attached to it. That was one of the ones that was inspired by reality.
Yes, I remember you telling me about that. Now, I know you're planning a deluxe second edition of the first volume, Midnight Creeps. I know you're working on the second volume right now. And you're going to have illustrations by the Newport-based but originally Russian artist Sasha Kutsinov.
Yes.
And I know you brought some of them now, so if you show us some of those, you can tell us about the drawings and the stories that they're based on.
All right. Now this one is my first story, Homunculus. It was one of the first renditions that he did. And he read the book and he was just inspired to do this on his own, and it just blew my mind. I mean, this is the best thing that's ever happened to the Midnight Creeps, and still today it's just unbelievable to have such a talented artist do all these depictions.
Now, the homunculus is the little man that lives in everyone's head, but
Yes.
this one is very specific, so we won't say more about that right now.
Right.
And then the next one?
The next one is what we were just discussing, In the Chair of Nightmare. This is one of 2 that he did about this story. One of my favorites.
And that's about the haunted chair.
Yes.
And Sasha was quite inspired, and he did one of these for all 17 short stories in the volume.
Absolutely.
So what's the next one you got?
This is also one of my favorites. This is a story called The Sea Pod.
Now you need to tell us a little bit about, well, you can't tell us too much about it.
Well, this story is about a man who's walking his dog along the shore after an enormous sea storm, and he finds something that washes up on the shore, and he takes it home, and he realizes that he wishes that he never did. He should have left it on the beach.
Yeah, lots of mayhem ensues. I read that story. There's a lot of body horror in what you do, and I know that you can get copies of Midnight Creeps from Amazon.
Yes.
As you can Leah Erickson's two books that are out. I just wanted to mention that as well. But your author's page, to me, is unique because you portray yourself as an individual that a person might not want to meet in real life. You want to tell us a little bit about that guy?
Yeah, I guess when it came time to write about the author, I guess I just wanted to make myself sound a little more interesting and sort of mysterious and dark, and then it just developed into a story all on its own. I mean, I painted myself as this character that belongs in the book.
Yes. You sound like one of your characters.
Yes, absolutely.
Not the soft-spoken, only slightly demonic person that we have here today. And so I know you've been diligently working on Midnight Creeps 2. Any idea when we're going to see a publication date for that?
Well, I wouldn't call it Midnight Creeps Part 2. In fact, it's going to be called Gargoyle.
Oh, all right.
But it is basically the same thing, where it's a collection of short stories again.
Mm-hmm.
And in fact, there are connections to the Midnight Creeps. I already have 2 sequels.
To the Homunculus.
Yes.
Yes.
Which I had a lot of fun
Absolutely.
with.
Indeed. All right, so Midnight Creeps and The Brambles from Leah Erickson and Blythe of the Spirit, Blythe of the Gate from Leah are all available on Amazon, and that about wraps it up for our first spoken word version of Art Matters with Wayne Quackenbush, Weird Tales edition.
All right. That night I laid my troubled head to rest. It began to ache. I felt as if my puzzled mind could not possibly absorb another fragment of information, no matter how familiar or far-fetched. I could not take the insanity anymore. I could not make sense of it. And as rotten as I felt for abandoning Graves in my powerlessness, it helped, although only little, to think that he brought this on himself in his genius ignorance. There I went again, trying to justify my inability to save him. I only wish I knew how. Tomorrow I would return to my sweet wife's lips and try to forget the terrors that have summoned me to the stench of their festering hide. That night I was awoken by a piercing pain on my nose. I woke up swatting my face in a fury, and although my mind was still mostly adrift, I was sure that I had knocked a solid object off my open mouth. I heard a loud thud followed by what could have been footfalls tapering off. Groggy and dazed, I sat up in the night and gasped for air as the horror set in. My wide eyes searched vainly in the blackness for answers. I tried to convince myself, although the pain was throbbing, that I was only dreaming, until I felt a warm sensation trickle down my nose and into my lips, the unmistakable taste of blood. My heart pounded wildly while I listened to a mocking silence that somehow seemed worse than a hissing, scratching, or moaning that I was now waiting for. After an endless moment or two, I began to fumble for a candle on the nightstand. Blood was now streaming off my chin as I fumbled for a match. For a while I held it in my trembling fingers, too frightened to strike it, while the blood oozed down my chest and began to pool in my navel. Finally I lit the candle. I shined the light over my bed and all about the room. I looked around for a possible weapon, but the only thing I could use was the small candle holder I was holding. I checked the bed. I checked the dark corners and turned my attention to the bed. Underneath. I must look underneath. I dragged my feet to the side of the bed and slowly folded to my knees. I could hear the bright red drips as they hit the hardwood floor, one by one. Holding my breath, I tore back the bed skirt violently, stuffing the flickering glow neath the bed frame. There was nothing but cobwebs. Rising, I turned my attention to the door. How reluctantly I crept up to it. I put my ear to it and listened. Again I heard the dreadful silence fill my empty ears. Slowly I wrapped my fingers round the knob and the coldness seeped into their tips as I cringed at the thought of what was on the other side. When I realized I was counting the droplets as they ran off the point of my nose, I finally wrenched the door open. As the light spilled out into the hallway, I looked to the right and then to the left, yet I saw nothing. Suddenly I found myself running down the hall, though I wasn't being chased. I didn't stop till I was before the door of Graves's lab. It was open, and the room was dimly lit inside. "Please come in," an all too familiar voice said. Pushing the door aside, I entered the den of that wicked creature, and there it was in its cage, licking its dark, dead lips with its two brown, worm-like tongues. "Why?" I shouted as I turned my stare at Graves sitting in his chair. "Why?" "Ha ha 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 ha!" he replied. "Think about it, Doctor. You're a man of intelligence. Give your exhausted mind a chance to wake up." Then it came to me like the lone candle that broke up the darkness 'neath my bed, exactly why he had hung that foul thing over me while I dreamt, and let it bite my face. If you think this will change the hopelessness of your situation, you're sadly mistaken, Graves. "Ah, but I think it will, Edward. For as I have nothing to lose, maybe this will give you the incentive you need to find a cure, Doctor," he said with a look of newfound security in his piercing eyes. "No, Alistair," I barked. "No, for I will kill you before I help you now." "Ha! Oh, I think not," he sneered. "Do you know what it's like to take a life, Ed? Do you? You've spent your entire life trying to save lives. I bet you cried your little eyes out the first time you lost a patient. You wept like a mother, didn't you, Edward?" While I stood trying to take in his words, he went on. "You can only imagine what it's like to press a feather bag over your lover's lips as she kicks her legs at the air and digs her fingernails into your neck. I really don't think you have it in you, Doctor." "Maybe you're right, Graves. Still, you can't force me to help you." "Oh, I really don't think that will be necessary, though I believe you will help me all the same." I then realized I was no longer leaking, and running my fingertip along the numbest spot on my nose, I felt two tiny swollen holes. "It's grown late, Doctor, and although it's been entertaining, I must say good night. I suggest you get all the sleep you can. Tomorrow you can resume your quest for a cure." With that he rose and slowly walked past me, disappearing through the doorway, his limp arm dangling at his side like a scarf. Again I found myself alone in the presence of a pestilence with eyes and teeth. As I stared at it, my head became heavy and dizzy. A weariness shadowed over me like a rain cloud. I felt too tired to stand. My legs began to wobble. I turned my heavy eyes away from the gray death and staggered toward my bed. What are you looking at?
That's a great ending. What are you looking at?